every time she would leave for work, we had this very specific like checking routine where I would give her my security blanket and she would meticulously like go through every seam to make sure there wasn't any rip or tear. And this was also around the time I started to be really worried that I would throw up. And I started to develop like emetophobia, like the fear of vomit. And I would ask her, am I going to throw up when you're gone? How do you know I'm not going to throw up? Leading into like later elementary school and middle school, the kind of emetophobia stuff really continued.
Welcome to Please Excuse My OCD. My name is Tyler, and today I'm very excited to have my friend Juliet here on the podcast, who is an OCD therapist. She has OCD herself. She's based out of Michigan, and I am just curious to hear about her story with OCD and as a therapist as well. I have come across Juliet's page on Instagram plenty of times, and I'm a big fan of what she does and how much she does for the OCD community. So I'm so excited to have her here on the podcast. So as always, I'd like to mention I am not a licensed therapist. So of course, if you are struggling, please seek advice from a mental health professional. Anyways, Juliet, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you? Thank you
I'm
so
doing
much for having
fantastic.
me. I'm really happy to
No,
be here.
thank
I'm
you.
sorry. I'm sorry for like intermittently sending you a message response. So for those of you who are listening, this has been a really long time coming because I am notoriously not very good at responding to messages. So I know you had reached out to me like months ago and we like tentatively had a week we were going to plan for in like August, and then come October, I was like, oh shit, I never responded. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I'm not any means any better at responding to people. So I totally understand itself. So I just really appreciate you being here to talk about your story and really I am fascinated with the fact that like people who have OCD such as ourselves, there's something in a lot of people who experience this where they feel this almost I don't even know if it's a desire or a need to help other people understand this. And the fact that you are somebody who in your profession is doing exactly that. And I know it's not just, specifically OCD, like you have to have a plethora of understanding when it comes to mental health across the spectrum. And so like it's a huge thing that I'm really passionate about. So having you here talk about that is incredible to me. Are you able to kind of dive in deep about your background with OCD and how it's been involved in your life throughout your life?
Absolutely. Yeah. So some of my earliest memories where I think OCD was starting to kind of show up were when I was very young, probably around 3, 4. I just had a lot of fears that something bad would happen to my parents. And I can remember like being in my dad's like backpack. You know how people would like have backpacks and like put their kids in them and you'd like walk
Mhm.
around. I have these memories of being young enough to be in one of those backpacks and kind of thinking about what would I do if my dad like slipped on a rock and fell and died? Like, how would I get home? This was before cell phones. So I remember I would always be kind of planning like, could I drive a car? Would I be able to find like a nice stranger who could help me? And I kind of took these to be like normal thoughts. And looking back, I'm like, oh, that's not normal. Like you should not be thinking about that when you're like just out of diapers. So
Right.
going from that, in kindergarten, I had a lot of fears about like being away from my mom. And I really struggled with like going to school because I had a lot of separation anxiety with her. But what I noticed that felt less just like separation anxiety and more OCD is I had a security blanket. And every time she would have to leave to go to work, I had a bunch of compulsions that I had to have her complete in order to like make sure my security blanket didn't have any holes in it. Because I guess if there was a hole, I would like completely lose it. And it would be basically like, this part of my mom would be, ripped or destroyed. And that would
Mhm.
be devastating. So every time she would leave for work, we had this very specific like checking routine where I would give her my security blanket and she would meticulously like go through every seam to make sure there wasn't any rip or tear. And this was also around the time I started to be really worried that I would throw up, and I started to develop like emetophobia, like the fear of vomit. So in addition to her checking my security blanket, I would ask her, am I going to throw up when you're gone? How do you know I'm not going to throw up? And then I would also have her, I can't remember if I would have her like look at my poop, but there was stuff with my poop of like, if I pooped, my OCD told me like I wouldn't throw up. Cause I think one time maybe someone said like, well, if you have a normal poop, like you won't throw up because your stomach is
Yeah.
not upset. So I would be like, Mom, I just pooped. Do you think I'm going to throw up? And then also like check my blankie. So that was like kindergarten, first grade.
Mhm.
And then leading into like later elementary school and middle school, the kind of emetophobia stuff really continued. I got to the point where like I really didn't like going to birthday parties or going out. Even just being at school was really scary because kids throw up all the time. So I was always worried like my classmates would throw up, or God forbid, I would throw up.
Sure.
And it was interesting because I've actually been thrown up on 3 or 4 times in my life, which I feel like is kind of a lot of times.
Yes, that's a bit.
I
Yeah.
have this memory of being at like a birthday party in like 5th grade or something, and like someone threw up on me. And it was pretty much like in the heat of like my like emetophobia. So it was really like traumatic and
Of
really
course.
gross. But also I like I'm a very like people pleasy person. So I didn't want the person to know I was like incredibly, because she was like throwing up. Oh
Yeah.
man, but I'll have to find the picture and send it to you, because there's like this picture of me at the birthday party, like following the throw up incident. And you can see
Oh my
in my eyes, I'm just like not doing okay. But I was trying to,
Oh,
the show must go on. So
you
anyway,
poor thing. Oh my god.
looking back at it, I'm like, I feel like the universe was really trying to test me
Yeah.
there or something. No, I
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
believe in that. But so in towards the end of 5th grade, my parents decided like the throw up stuff was a little bit out of the range of like normal. So they found a therapist for me. And this therapist was really great because she did kind of like pseudo exposure therapy, like very kid appropriate, but she had a good sense of like how anxiety and OCD can function and what we can do to help decrease the effects of them.
Mhm.
And around the same time when I started therapy, I also started to have a lot of harm OCD. So I was really afraid of like knives and heights and guns. Oh, yeah, this is a fun fact. This one time when I was a kid, probably like 2nd grade, I was at my grandparents' house and I was walking through their basement. And in the basement, I find a gun that is just like rogue. And
Oh my gosh.
luckily, it was a World War I replica gun and it was like not loaded. But I remember like I had to pull the trigger. And
Mhm.
that's fucking crazy because so I did that. I didn't want to, but I was like, I have to do it. Blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. It wasn't facing me or anything, but I told my mom because I also had to confess that I had
Of
pulled the
course.
trigger on this gun. And she was like, oh my God, I didn't. Anyway, it turns out it was not loaded. It was this like historical gun. But anyway, that's kind of crazy because thank God that was not
Yeah.
loaded, because that would be horrible.
Of
Anyway,
course.
so fast forward, I'm like in middle school, I'm in therapy. It was really helpful for me. And then because of that, a lot of my OCD kind of went under the radar for the next like 6-ish years. Like I still had a
Mhm.
lot of obsessions and a lot of mental compulsions, but I was able to kind of like compartmentalize them and go on and live a pretty like joyful life.
Mhm.
And I always thought at that point, like, oh yeah, I had OCD and I don't have OCD anymore. Like it was in the past. We're good. We did that. Now we don't have that. And it wasn't until like end of college slash early graduate school when I realized how wrong I was about that. Um, it was around that time when kind of I think like the second wave of OCD really hit me of like it being more active. And
Hmm.
now when I look back, there were always things like through high school, through college, even after I graduated college, but I just didn't realize they were OCD. And that kind
Sure.
of is one of the things that led me to deciding to become an OCD specialist, is that with OCD, it's so misunderstood, even in like mental health spaces. And I was super privileged because I was able to be diagnosed with OCD when I was in like fifth, sixth grade.
Hmm.
But even despite this, I never really like learned what OCD was. Like I know my therapist at the time mentioned like, oh yeah, you're OCD. And I remember thinking, like I don't clean things. I'm not like, I don't count, like I don't knock on things.
Hmm.
And I know she probably provided some education on it, but I just had no idea all of the ways OCD can look until I was in graduate school in a class on mental illness for my therapy degree. And
Hmm.
then I was like, oh, like this is so interesting, because I didn't realize like 90% of the things I think about and do and worry about are actually just like OCD. So that's a very like
Wow.
Cliff Notes version of where I decided that specializing in OCD could be cool. But then from there, I've worked in other therapy settings. I've done like community mental health. I've worked with kids and teens in like pretty intensive trauma crisis therapy, and then I've worked in generalist private practice, and then I've worked a little bit in adoption and foster care, and then
Yeah.
I made my way to private practice with my own practice a little over a year ago, and I'm very happy to be here.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It's the best thing ever. I love it. So I know that was a lot of information, and I just like put a lot out there. So I'll be quiet for a minute. And
No, that was wonderful. I really do appreciate you sharing all of that because there's so much there that I, like, connected with when you were talking about all of that. I feel like we,
mm,
like, were the same person growing up because
aw,
we had, like,
well,
the
I'm sorry,
same.
but
Yeah, yeah.
mhm.
That's you're like, on one end, you're like, "Oh my god, yeah, high five," but the other end, you're like, "I'm so sorry, like, you had to deal with that."
Yes,
You
yes to
know?
all. Hmm.
So the checking, at a young age, this is so interesting to me when you said that, like, the fear, like, harm OCD, like, about your parents dying. It's so interesting where that comes from, and I know I've heard this across many different stories that I've heard from other people with their experience with OCD because that was one of mine as well at a young age. And when we talk about how OCD attacks our values, and if you think about what your values are, as a like 5-year-old or 6-year-old, like in your circle of values, of course your parents are usually the first ones in there. So, but it's interesting how it manifests and kind of like starts and then expands from there. And then you brought up, you know, emetophobia as something that was like at the forefront of your experience. Like I've experienced that my whole life and I still do. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm wondering for you, like when you, for example, you remember being thrown up on, like, I don't mean to laugh, but like if you think about it, like that is a lot of
Those are,
times to be thrown up on,
it
right?
is.
Like it's interesting to think about, but the fact of the matter is, did you have that come up? I don't mean that in like a joking way, like not like I'm not being facetious. Like, did you imagine? Did you have that emetophobia kind of manifest after something like that happened, or was it like before, and then all of these incidents start to happen afterwards?
It was before.
Wow!
Like the time I got thrown up on the first time, I was in like fifth grade. And that was when it was pretty bad, but like it had been there for at least 3 years beforehand.
Wow!
Um, which is interesting because I worked really hard. It's ironic, right? Like I worked really hard to
Yeah.
avoid people who might look sick, or
Yep.
like this is probably really mean, but like I remember every single person I've ever seen throw up. And I think for me, for a long time, there was like a lot of emotional contamination with them.
Hmm.
Like
Of
I didn't
course.
want to be close to them. I didn't really want to like talk to them. Luckily now, I think it shifted when I watched my nephew throw up. And I remember thinking, like, I love this kid so much that even though, like, I'm pretty grossed about throw up, like, I don't have the same, like, just like visceral reaction to it. And I was like, this is really interesting. I wonder if most people feel like this, like,
Mhm.
in general, when they see someone throwing up.
People,
Um,
like, who don't have emetophobia and they're
yeah, yeah. And it's like,
yeah.
yeah, it's gross, but also it's like, oh, they're sick. Like, that's
Yeah.
too bad.
Yeah, like, I wish I could help you,
Hmm.
like, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's really interesting to put in that perspective,
Hmm.
and, as somebody like myself who I'm not really sure if I want kids or not, like, I'm 30 years old, I'm in that
Mm,
place where I'm just like, "Well, what do I want? What am I doing?"
yeah.
And that's one of the thoughts that comes up is like if I like like if I see my cat, like my cat's next to me, she's like my best friend. But if I see her
Aw.
throwing up, I have that reaction and I can clean her throw up all day. Like it doesn't affect me. But I know it's
Yeah.
because like her throw up's not gonna like get me sick. But like if I
Uh-huh.
see like, a baby or like someone I care about, am I gonna have that same reaction? So it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, and I know for a lot of people too, like the idea of like being pregnant and having like morning sickness
Hmm.
and like possibly feeling or throwing up constantly for like 9 months, that is also like a big thing that can really prevent
Yeah,
people from moving forward with things that they
of
actually
course.
really want out of life.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and it's
Mhm.
sad too, but, like, I mean, we talk about OCD and how it's progressed and with this kind of timeline for your life, when you were first put in therapy and you said around middle school, right? Was around the time or,
Mhm.
like, 5th grade?
Yes.
Was that ERP or was that, like, talk therapy? Like, what kind of therapy was that?
I think that it was not, she was not like a ERP specialist. So she
Mhm,
worked with lots of different people with different types of like mental health
mhm,
difficulties. She did use a lot of kind of ERP based interventions. Like it wasn't like formal ERP, but for
right,
example, she would have me, like when I started really worrying about knives, she would have me every day like draw pictures of knives and then draw pictures
mhm,
of, me stabbing people with knives or me stabbing myself with knives. And then we moved up to um my parents had like cooking knives and my dad had like pocket knives. And I used to always need to have him put the pocket knives in a very specific place every night because I worried I would go and like stab
mhm,
myself or something. So she would have me like hold the knife and look at the knife and do really pretty kind of traditional exposure
sure,
stuff. But then also we did kind of just talk about general stuff and it wasn't like structured ERP, but it
mhm.
definitely, the stuff that helped most was the ERP aspects of it.
Yes, okay, that makes sense. That's so wonderful that this therapist you're working with understood that, and I think that's a beautiful thing because there were so many instances where I went to a therapist and they didn't understand the thoughts.
Yeah.
They would be like, "Well, why are you having that kind of thought?" Like,
Hmm.
it's like, "Well, I don't know, you tell me." So, it's interesting that you had, like, elements of that even though it wasn't structured ERP, like, you had elements of that kind of helping you through that.
I was really fortunate to get to like work with her. And she also had experience working with other people with like harm and like pedophilia related OCD. Cause she would sometimes say,
Mhm,
like, oh, yeah, like talking about intrusive thoughts and talking about how, yeah, some of my other clients have similar thoughts. And, this doesn't mean they're going to act on them. They're actually like the sweetest old ladies ever. And then they're having these thoughts about like stabbing their husbands. And she did a really good job of like providing psychoeducation while also not just like giving me way too much information because I was like 12.
right, right, that makes sense,
Hmm.
and it's interesting that you said you're at this point, your OCD kind of, like, took a back seat for a while, and
It
then it
did.
came back, right? Or, like,
Hmm.
was like, "Hey, I'm still here," years later. Would you
Yeah.
attribute
Yeah.
that to, like, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. You go first.
I was thinking, like, would you attribute that to, like, the time that in your life, like, being in school, maybe being under stress or anything like that? Or was it just something that just kind of came out of nowhere?
Like when I noticed my OCD getting like really bad again,
Mhm,
I think there were a few. parts of that. The first part was it was a big change. So I graduated with my master's degree in social work in April of 2020. So COVID had just started. It was a really weird time, as I'm sure you remember.
Oh, yes.
And I started working as a therapist in like May of 2020 when it was like pre-vaccine,
Wow.
really like high stress in that aspect. And the job I had first, I was also doing home-based therapy. So I would actually be like going to people's houses and spending like 2 to 4 hours a week in each client's house with their family, doing like intensive crisis stabilization stuff. So that
Wow.
was a really that was a really stressful job in general.
Of
But then when you
course.
pair up on like COVID, and I was really afraid of getting sick. So there were a lot of things with that. And then also, I think probably just like life change. Like I had been so used to going to school and doing this one specific, like we're in school for like, I don't know, 20 years pretty much. And then I
Yeah.
wasn't. So there was a very different structure to my life. And then I think also just maybe my brain was, continuing to develop because I was like 22, 21 at the time.
Mhm.
And it was probably just like the perfect storm for OCD to come back up. Um, but it was interesting because when I noticed the OCD getting really bad again, I didn't realize it was OCD until like a year or so later, because when I was first having a lot of this like new OCD, it was all related to like the harm and the possible like danger that my clients could be in, which is
Mhm.
interesting because there were objective like risk factors with the client population I was working with. There was a lot of severe mental illness, a lot of like domestic violence and abuse and suicidal ideation that was just objectively there.
Mhm.
But then my OCD took that and ran with it to the point of like, if I didn't tell my supervisor like every single thing that every single client said in a session, they were going to die. It was going to be all my fault. I was going to get
Mm.
sued. I was going to lose my license. And it could all be prevented by just getting the okay from my supervisor.
Gotcha.
So looking back on it, I was like, yeah, that was definitely a lot of OCD. But in the moment, I was just like, I'm being a responsible therapist and this is what I have to do.
Mhm.
Um, so
So
that's kind
that
of a little bit more of what was going on there.
Gotcha, okay. So that makes sense. I mean, and especially considering, like, you said it came like, you went a long period of time where it didn't really seem like it was at the forefront of driving you in the decisions you made, even though it was still there. And then now
Mm-hmm.
you're in a stressful kind of environment, or you're in a multitude of stressful environments, and you're doing something to which you care about and you really do value, which is your job and the work you do and the people you work with. So that's like that's super understanding in the fact that like OCD would come out and be like, "Hey, like, by the way, this is something to keep an eye on." And the fact that you are so, and I know you're so passionate about sharing about harm OCD and pedophilia OCD, and those are
Mm-hmm.
things that I've touched upon in little spurts here and there with different guests, but not really dove into. And I think
Mm.
it's important to kind of talk about those because they're so taboo, right? When it comes
Mm-hmm.
to the way people look at them, or think of like their reactions when you bring up those kind of words, or just,
Yes.
what they're all about. And like to go from complete ignorance of what, harm and pedophilia OCD is, to now having a like, in your position, having a full understanding of it and like helping people with that. What do you think is like, how do we turn the page and really have like healthy conversations about that for people who may not really know if they're struggling with that, like pedophilia OCD. Like I had harm OCD, not
Mm-hmm.
pedophilia OCD. I had like pretty much had so many different subtypes, but I understand the process, of they're
Yes.
all kind of connected, right? So, um, where could we, like, for someone who doesn't have OCD, and or like they may be struggling with those kind of thoughts, or they think they have OCD but are not like diagnosed is what I mean. Like, how does somebody go about like talking about that and getting the help they need, in a society
Mm,
like this?
yeah. Yeah. And I'm so glad we're talking about like harm and POCD just because, yeah, very near and dear to my heart. And it's important to talk about these things. So thank you.
Yeah, of
The thing
course.
I would say with just kind of expanding the general public's knowledge of like what OCD is and the different ways it can present itself, I think, the things that like you're doing, like the advocacy piece of like just putting information about OCD into the mainstream and talking about like myths versus facts of like what are actual intrusive thoughts versus what are impulsive thoughts.
Mhm.
How can we, help the media and like people spread more accurate information? I think that's a really like important first step. And one good thing about social media is, well, it's kind of both because on one hand it's really great, and then on the other hand we have things like my intrusive thoughts won and I dyed my hair, like, and that's
Yeah,
totally not at all what intrusive thoughts are. But if
exactly.
we can share information, that's a good start just because there are so many people who have these types of really distressing thoughts about like harming themselves, harming other people, doing something like sexually inappropriate to a child or an animal,
Mhm.
and live with these thoughts and like do not tell a single person because they have no idea what's going on. They feel like they're going crazy, they feel like they're a monster. And just for them to understand, even like on a very basic level, like there are these things called intrusive thoughts, and these
Mhm.
thoughts go against who you are. They're ego dystonic, they're really distressing, and to some extent everyone has them at times, but some people really over identify with the thoughts and get really scared of them, and then they're more frequent. So just like providing information, I think, is like the first step.
Mhm.
And then if you're someone who is like listening to this and you think you could have OCD, go to the International OCD Foundation, the IOCDF.org. They have really wonderful resources about OCD, about intrusive thoughts, about obsessions and compulsions. And I think it's a really great place to start because all of the info that you get from there is vetted, it is accurate, and it's a good starting point.
I love that.
Mhm.
That's so valid and valuable information, and I just found out about the IOCDF within the past few years, and,
Me too.
like, it's so interesting, like, we struggled our whole lives, and then we find these, like, resources later, and, of course, social media changes things. We start having conversations, and people come out of the woodwork and start talking about their experience, and I think that's so important, but there's still so many people who live with these thoughts and feelings, and they don't tell anybody, and I understand that because when I went to because I got diagnosed at 10 with OCD, but I
We're
didn't
like very
know.
similar.
Yeah,
Hmm.
like I had the checking with, like, every time my mom would leave, I'd be like, "Is this gonna happen? How do you know this isn't gonna happen?" Like,
Uh,
I literally had the same things that you did,
Shout out to our
and
moms. I
yeah,
guess we
for
like
real.
them.
For real, like, she's an angel and she didn't my mom didn't know that, like, reassuring only kept the cycle going, right? So,
Yeah.
when I was 19, when I was in college, I had an like, almost I call it a nervous breakdown because that was the time that I started becoming agoraphobic, and it was, like,
Oh, yeah.
really hard, and I remember going to my doctor and being like, "I'm gonna tell him, like, that I'm having these thoughts of hurting myself and hurting my family, and, like, I'm afraid I'm gonna get up and sleepwalk and, like, grab a knife and hurt someone," and I was like, "He could possibly take me away," and I'm like, "But right
Mm.
now I feel like I'm, like, in jail anyway, I'm just gonna say it," and so I told him, and he goes, "Well, that's your OCD," and I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, that's,
Oh.
like, part of your OCD," and I was like, "What do you mean?" Like, I thought my OCD was just, like, my neatness and, like, keeping things in order, and, like, 9 years later, he was the one that
Mhm.
my physician was the one
Wow.
that, like, told me, "This is what's happening, and, like, I'm gonna give you medication." And
Mm.
so it's interesting, like, there's so many people out there who probably feel the same way about those harm and, like, POCD thoughts, and what they don't realize is they're, like,
Yeah.
the least likely person to actually commit those kind of things, and because their brain is red flagging it, they're the ones who are, like, paying attention to it because their brain is. So, like, the fact that I know you're on social media talking about a lot of those, like, you're making videos that really pertain to, educating people who have harm in POCD and things like that. And I think that's so important. And I think people who are afraid to talk to someone who is, like a mental health professional, because they have heard stories of people, telling their
Hmm.
OCD thoughts. The professional doesn't understand it, and then things get worse. They put them into a hospital or whatever the case is. But it's important to go, like you said, to the IOCDF, where they have so many resources for OCD specialists and people who actually understand these things.
Certainly. And I'm thinking more about your experience of like, you knew you had OCD on some level,
Hmm.
but you didn't really have the full kind of like picture of like all the ways OCD could show up. And
Yep.
because of that, it was like, it felt so real. And then your
Hmm.
your doctor was like, "Oh, that's just your OCD." You're like, "I wish someone told me this like 10
Yeah.
years ago, but okay, thanks."
I know. It was frustrating because I was in therapy, but, like, it was talk therapy, and it was,
Mm,
like, this weird
mm,
thing where they were like, "Yeah, like, this all this anxiety is your separation anxiety." It's not like they didn't focus on the OCD aspect of it all, and then kinda went dormant. Same thing in high school. It was kinda, like, there, but not there, and then it just hit me like a like, bag of bricks in college, and I was like,
mhm.
"Oh, like, this what is this?"
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I
Yeah, very very similar, and I'm glad that when you did decide to share with your doctor, like, they had enough knowledge of, like, 1, they knew you had OCD, 2, they understood, like, intrusive
Mhm.
thoughts and how those things, AKA intrusive thoughts, can be really
Yeah,
common for people with OCD. And it was just like, oh, yeah, that's just your OCD.
yeah, which
Hmm.
the amount of relief, like, I'm sure you can, like, relate to this when, like, you actually have someone who understands what you're talking about. The relief that you get from that is, like, I don't know, for me, I was like, "Oh my god," like, I remember the feeling of, like, "You mean you know what this is? Like, you mean I'm not, like, psychotic and I'm gonna, like, hurt everyone I love?" Like,
Hmm.
crazy, crazy realization. And so I just want people to feel that same sense of relief when they understand that, like, there's resources and that they're not the only ones who've experienced those kind of thoughts, because it really does make you feel like you're like the only one in the world who's experienced this.
Yeah. And that's such a good point because one thing that's been unexpected about, as I've shared more about my experiences with like harm OCD and POCD, there have been a lot of people who I've known for quite a long time, like people I went to school with, people who are like mutual friends of mine who I've just kind of kept in contact with over the last like many years of my life, have
Mhm.
reached out to me or have commented on some of my like posts and said like, "Oh, like I had this too," or I've experienced this and I thought I was the only one. I had no idea. And it's interesting because I remember for so long myself going through it, it really did feel like, oh my gosh, like everyone else has a normal brain. I don't know why I can't stop thinking about this. This is terrible and scary. And just knowing that, like, that was not true. And a lot of the people I was like interacting with frequently during that time might have also been going through the exact same thing,
Right.
unbeknownst to me. And obviously, because, OCD is really common, but it's so easy to feel like, oh, it's just me.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Mhm.
really is. And I love what you're doing, by the way. You started the Intrusive Plots, right, podcast, where you
Yes.
talk of, like, I know we didn't talk about this prior, but, like, it's something that's, like, clicking in my brain. And I love what you're doing. Like, really, this kind of bridges what we're talking about earlier, where it's about talking about these conversations and sharing the information. And one of the big things that I think is an issue is the way pop culture reflects what OCD is. And you
Absolutely.
are doing exactly the groundwork of going in and, like, watching these movies, right? And watching these things that have to do with how OCD is portrayed in the media. And I wanted to ask your this question. Just, I don't think I've seen anything on this on your page yet, but did you watch Turtles All the Way Down? Did you read the book?
Yes. And we're saving that for later in the season because we know it's going
Good.
to be like such a heavy hitter. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, I did. I read, so I'm really bad at reading. I didn't learn how to read till I was in fifth grade because I
Mhm.
had some sort of thing going on with my eyes. Um, so I always put that out because I started the book I really liked it. I just got distracted and didn't finish it.
Sure.
But I watched the movie, and I think, just like a lot of people, felt a very like comforting / like very relatable. And it also just felt like, I mean, it's clear, John Green has been open about his
Mhm.
experience with OCD, and it's clear that, he really understands that part of OCD that's hard to really describe to someone who
Mhm.
doesn't have OCD. But seeing it play out in the movie was like really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. I had, like, a really visceral, like, I just,
Mhm.
like, was like, I don't know, like, in that feeling in your chest when you're, like, about to cry and then you cry, like,
Yeah.
that kind of feeling, and it
Uh-huh.
takes a lot for me to, I think,
Mm.
feel that when I'm watching a movie, I don't know, but I'm always curious to see, like, how people feel when they watch a film like that and they can relate to it on some level.
Mhm.
So, I think it's wonderful what you're doing, with the podcast, and I think it's so interesting because it's so unique and it's so, like, niche specific. OCD is such a niche specific thing for in the mental health community that we need more cool things like that. So,
Thank you. Thank you. It's been really fun. I connected with Peter Cannon, who's the director of the film Exposure, which is
yes.
a psychological thriller, and OCD is part of it.
Hmm.
We connected on Instagram like a year and a half ago because he asked for me to like review one of his movie to see, like, as a therapist, how did I think they represented OCD? Was it
Hmm.
accurate? Things like that. So we like got to know each other through that. And then at the conference this past year, actually, we met in person and like really hit it off. And I was expecting it to just be more like of a like, professional, like we know each other, but
Yeah.
we really hit it off. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Like maybe we should talk more about movies and film and OCD. And it really naturally kind of came to be. But
Yeah.
I'm feeling excited. It's such a fun like break from the
Yeah.
therapy and the more like heavy stuff
Hmm.
that comes with this work.
Hmm.
And I know you mentioned you're interested in, pursuing a career in mental health therapy as
Yeah.
well. And
Yeah.
the kind of thing that I think has taken me some time to really fully understand is like the importance of having multiple things that are important to you and that bring you joy outside of your work as a therapist, because
Yes.
taking care of yourself and having things that are not just so intense, it's so
Yes.
important.
I was going to ask you about
Mhm.
that because I understand the kind of empathy and sensitivity that is there when it comes to not only just therapy itself, but advocacy and being and hearing people's stories and talking to them and understanding what they felt, in certain instances. And for you as somebody, because I can feel that you're an empathetic person. And so when you are in that position where not only are you empathetic, but you have lived experience, you understand what all of this is like, and you're working with many different types of people, different backgrounds, different stories, how do you kind of like separate that empathy, not even empathy, but like separate that heaviness from like your day-to-day life, and also if you can separate it from like your OCD and like the way
Mm,
that you handle certain things? Does that make sense?
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think there are a couple parts to that question.
Hmm.
The first thing that I find really pleasant about the work I do is that it's really easy to tell other people like how to respond to their OCD. Like it's like just don't do your convulsions and like sit with the
Hmm.
anxiety. That's really like it's hard to do it, but it's easy to like say
Yeah.
that. So there is kind of like a dual process that I find where I can be talking to a client and working with them on their exposure hierarchy, and we're doing all of this work. And it's also a really good reminder for me of like, yep, just like they have to do these things that they don't want to do, that feels scary, but you know why it's important, you have to do that too. So it's a good reminder for me to like keep up on kind of the maintenance work that I do with my own OCD.
Hmm.
A lot of people often ask the question you asked about how is it working with people with OCD when you have OCD? Like, does it trigger my OCD? Does it bring up stuff for me? And I actually find it kind of the opposite. When I work with clients who have other things that are distressing to them, like trauma or grief and loss, or some of the other things, I find that those are actually harder for me in terms of like emotion transference wise than the OCD
Mhm.
stuff. The OCD stuff feels really kind of like, it's much more like controlled in terms of like there's a very clear kind of protocol we take to treating OCD, and the tools that I use are really very straightforward. And there's a lot of like comfort in the predictability of OCD, which is kind of ironic
Yeah.
because like it can feel like OCD is just doing anything. But for me, it's a way I can be like, sometimes I feel, as I know you probably know, and most people with OCD know, like a lot of OCD treatment is like hard in the moment. So that way, 5 months from now, it will feel better.
Mhm.
And for me, I think the hardest part of doing OCD treatment was kind of just becoming more comfortable with other people's discomfort that comes from
Yeah.
ERP. And once I felt like I was able to do that, the rest of it kind of fell into place.
Wow.
So I don't know if that answered your
That
question,
does.
but that's
Yeah.
kind of where I am with it now.
So, well, I love how you just explained that because earlier when you were saying that you had that people pleasing almost underlying
Mm.
background, because I am the same way. And it's
Mhm.
really when you see someone uncomfortable, like you're trying so hard to do everything to make sure that they're not like uncomfortable. And so I'm so glad you brought that up where it's like you almost had to get over your own discomfort of watching them be uncomfortable in order to like push through that. Like that is so profound. Like that is really like a profound like
Mm.
realization, right? Rather than just like uh, internalizing everything and like looking at your own discomfort, like you're looking at their discomfort, and it's like I have to like get over that hump in order for me to effectively help them, which is so interesting to me.
Thank you. Yeah, it definitely was, with ERP, it is very different than than other types of therapy. And
Yeah.
learning how to kind of separate a client from their OCD too has been helpful, because when I look at someone and we're doing an exposure and it's clear that they're like really uncomfortable, they're really anxious, they're getting really distressed, I try and kind of see, yes, they're feeling this. And this is also like, we're really trying to make their OCD uncomfortable. And we're doing a good job of that.
Mhm.
And being a good therapist means making someone's OCD uncomfortable, which
Mhm.
means it will be sucky now and then they'll feel better later. And then when I see the progress and people actually getting better in real time, it really reinforces the importance of leaning into it, feeling uncomfortable,
Mhm.
and it's worth it. And I think most of my clients would agree that like the discomfort that they feel doing ERP is completely worth the life that they get afterwards.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear these stories of success stories, right, from ERP, and I only recently found out about real ERP within the past year, and I noticed that I tried that on my own in my mid-20s. I had really bad existential OCD, and,
Ah,
health OCD has kind of always been there, so there was, like, some overlap in
mm,
certain things, and I would, like, research things that made me feel uncomfortable, but I was compulsing the whole time, so I was just torturing myself. Um, so hearing about ERP and, like, especially at the conference, listening to other people's stories about even the first time they went to like, certain people were talking about their story going to the OCD conference for the first time, and, like, almost like doing, like, an exposure walk, I think is what they called it. Have
yes.
you participated in one of those?
No, because I had to go like a professional mixer, which was fun, but not as fun. No, I didn't. But it sounded, I saw some pictures of people like licking garbage cans
Yes,
and lots of stuff.
yes.
I'd like to go. I think I'm going to try and do it next year.
Yeah, that's
Did you do it?
no, 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 I I think I need to work my way up there.
Okay.
But that was so, like, intriguing to me because you won't find that in other, organization. You won't find that in other forms of therapy out, ERP. Like, you're not gonna be doing ERP with trauma, I would assume, right? It's more just like, things that like phobias and, OCD in general. But I remember seeing that and really thinking to myself like, "Wow, this is like super special to witness, and like I want to be able to do that." And so, I don't know, I just wanted to share, like, we were talking about ERP, and I think that there's a lot of people who, like myself, who may be scared to do something like that or start in a specific, um, place with that. And what would you say to those people who are like who are putting off, true ERP because
Hmm.
of fear?
Yeah. I mean, I think a big part of ERP that I don't know how much is really discussed when people
Mhm,
think about it. Like you think about like watching like the show Fear Factor where you're like sitting in a coffin full of spiders or something is the kind of importance and the how do you say it? Like the way that client buy-in and client consent is and should be kind of at the forefront of
mhm,
all ERP. So yes, you are going into it and you're agreeing to feel uncomfortable, but you get to choose how that looks for you. So for some people, there are certain types of exposures that they feel like I'm willing to be uncomfortable with this. And then there are some things that like, I can't do that right now and I'm not going to make myself do that. And if you have a therapist who's really like collaborative and open to your buy-in, they will be able to meet you where you are and help you kind of start with something that feels doable and then slowly working your way up to something that maybe right now feels impossible, but 3 months from now might feel easier. And I think a lot of people imagine like doing ERP and just starting with like the highest level exposure they could
mhm.
imagine. And I guess if someone wanted to do that, great. But for most people, it starts with something that feels small and manageable, but also hard. And then it becomes more difficult with time. So
Yeah,
finding a therapist that you feel comfortable with, and then really feeling like allowing yourself to advocate for what you might be needing in the exposure therapy process to make it doable for you.
that
Mhm.
gives the person experiencing it control and being able
Yeah.
to, you know, see what works for them for the time being, and then also having goals at the
Hmm.
same time.
Yeah. And I also usually encourage my clients to kind of choose their exposures too. Like I know
Mhm.
some therapists will be like, today we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And I find that it usually works better if I can have my clients choose because they know their lives really well. They know the things that they can't do because of their OCD, and they know the things that they would like to do. So,
Mhm.
using that as a guide, clients are often able to say, like, this is what I want to do. This feels hard, but like it's worth it because I want to be able to go to my um, daughter's gymnastics competition in a month and not be petrified that I'm looking at the kids inappropriately or something like
Right.
that. So we could
Mhm.
work our way up to that. Versus if
Mhm.
I say, we're going to just do this random exposure that maybe is good for some people with like POCD, but it might not really apply to them at all.
Right, that makes sense.
Mhm.
I think that's so important, and it really does solidify the fact that it's not the thoughts, it's not the actual content itself when it comes to these kind of things. It's more so how we react to them, how our bodies react to them, and really what we do about that discomfort.
Mhm.
When I was in Florida too, I go to Florida often for Universal Studios because I like to ride rides, but, during that week, I took a day with my mom and, we went to Universal, and I contamination OCD and emetophobia are, like, my biggest ones, and
Mhm.
there was an ice cream cart, and, like, they had the spoons in the, like, I don't even know what you'd call them, like a hole in the cupboard or something, and,
Oh,
like, you
yeah.
just go in and
Uh-huh.
grab them. And, of course, my OCD was just like, "Oh, like, people stick their hands in there, and, like, their hands will touch the sides of it, and, like, my spoon touches the side of it, or, like, what if they touch the spoon that I pick, like, with their hands?" And that was, like, a huge turning moment for me because otherwise I wouldn't have done it. But I was, like,
Mm.
thinking about the conference, and I was like, "Well, if other people are exposing
Mhm.
themselves and, doing things that are uncomfortable, like, why can't I do this?" And I did it. Like, I took the spoon out and, like, I had my ice cream, and then we went on the next ride. But it was just, like, that
Yeah.
awareness of, like, "Oh, like, I get to choose if I do this or not right now, and I'm gonna be a little bit uncomfortable, and or I might be, like, really uncomfortable, but I'm gonna choose to do it." I think
Yeah.
is huge for people with OCD who sometimes feel like they may not have that choice when it comes to fear.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a really good example because you were really enjoying your time. You were doing something that you value. It was really hot because it was like
Yeah.
July in Orlando. So having an
Yeah.
ice cream probably was, a great idea. And you
Mhm.
chose to kind of lean into the anxiety so you could do the thing that was important to you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, and so I think it's so important what you're doing. I mean, even the fact that you said you have your own private practice now, and you're helping people, in your way, on your turf, in with what you know. And I think that's a huge, huge deal, especially with someone, who has OCD like ourselves. We know how hard it can be sometimes to, like, take big steps and to do big things and to lean into discomfort and uncertainty. And you're doing that not only in, like, life, but in your profession, in a professional setting. And I think that's a huge thing for people with OCD to understand too, is you can still live a really wonderful life that you want to live on your terms, even with fear, even with it, even being diagnosed with OCD. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and on not only on social media, but, like, the fact that, in a professional setting with your own private practice, I think that's a huge statement.
Thank you so much. I find that so when I after my first year as being a therapist, when I realized how much OCD was still there, I found I've worked with like a OCD specific ERP therapist. I also started taking meds at that point. And one of the things that I didn't expect would come from doing kind of like that phase of ERP plus being on meds was like, not only did my OCD improve, but a lot of the things that we learn in ERP can be kind of guiding tenets for living a really like joyful life. And
Mhm.
it really did help me learn how to like trust myself more, feel more confident, lean into the unknown and take risks. Cause that was something that was really scary for me. I mean, obviously, who isn't afraid of that? Most people,
Sure.
or everyone is afraid of that in some way. But for me, that was really a nice benefit of ERP that it didn't even impact. It wasn't like, oh, I just don't want to be afraid of this one thing. It was like, oh, my world is getting bigger. And
Mhm.
that's what we want for all of us.
I think that's wonderful. Is there anything specific that you would like to leave here on the podcast, before we part ways? Because we could talk
I
all
know.
day. There's
Yeah.
so much that I would love to have you on again at some point
Thank
and
you. Yeah. I'm
dive
having a really
deeper.
good time. You are really good at asking questions and kind of
Thank you.
engaging with people and like guiding the kind of interview process. So just
Thank
with that,
you.
I feel like,
Oh,
if you do decide to do therapy as a career, I think you could be
absolutely.
really, really successful with that.
Thank you so much. I really
Mhm.
appreciate that.
It's true. Yeah. It's like, I find that being able to talk to people and listen and reflect and make them feel comfortable is such an important skill in general, but especially as a therapist. And it seems like you just kind of naturally have that. So
Thank you. Oh, that means so
that's
much. My
that's
day is made.
exciting. Oh, good. I'm glad. You can replay this tape when you feel a little bit doubtful.
I probably will. Oh, thank you so
But
much.
But in terms of like leaving something here, or any other thoughts I'm having? Oh, I got one. So one thing I would leave you with, and I hope the listeners can take this with them as well, is I think with OCD, I know with OCD that it is really like distressing and serious and like very heavy. And what I find can be really helpful, what a lot of my clients find can be really helpful, is leaning into the OCD with a lot of humor, because OCD is really absurd. And when we approach it so seriously all of the time, it can almost make it feel even more serious. And leaning into it with sarcasm, with hyperbolic responses, with eye rolls and humor can just be such a great way to like diffuse the intensity
Mhm.
a little bit. So that's a big thing I'm a huge fan of, and I hope, if you all haven't tried it, I hope you can give it a try, because it's really freeing.
I love that. That's so insightful, and thank you for sharing that because you are right. Whereas not only is your brain red flagging these thoughts, but it's also judging them. You're judging yourself. You start to go
Mhm.
down this heavy rabbit hole, and the humor side of it can really lighten things up in the fact of like, you know what, like, do I really have to be this serious right now? On top of the like fear that I am, experiencing, especially
Yes.
with like exit like when I had existential OCD, like I love existentialism. I love talking about it. But
Mhm.
it's like one of those things where the intrusive thought of why am I responding to this text message when like none of this is going to matter in like 30 million years, the sun's going to explode, like what's the point? And
Mm.
responding to that being like, well, I like the blue, I like the blue, message that appears, underneath, my iMessage. Like I just like the blue, so I might as well just send it so I can see another
Nice.
blue message. It's like coming back
Yes.
at it with a different perspective and really just trying to lighten the mood. I think that's so valuable. So, and I do hope the listeners um can take that with some, you know, with some uh, added to their toolbox per se.
Me too.
So,
Me too. And that's one of the things about Intrusive Plots, the podcast that my friend Peter Cannon and I have, is like, yeah, we're talking about OCD, we're talking about really hard stuff. But I mean, I know he's really good at editing, so like it probably makes our jokes land a little bit better. But I actually
mhm.
think we're objective. Like, I think it's actually kind of funny. So another plug for my for
Absolutely.
my side
Ab
project there. Yeah.
with its in its own right. I mean, I think you guys are doing an incredible job. I love it when it pops up on my feed on Instagram,
Aw, thanks.
because it's a wonderful show, and I hope people, if you're listening to this for the first time and you haven't heard Intrusive Plots, like, absolutely go give them a listen, and I think it's really cool to see something like that. I don't think that there's anything really like that in media right now, at least in the podcast side of things and social media. So I think that you guys are doing an incredible job, and also for people who are listening to you for the first time, like where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at OCD_therapist_Juliet, or you can just search my name, Juliet Gustafson. I also have a Patreon where I make um, longer, kind of more in depth content about OCD. It's, I think, like $5.99 a month or $4.99 a month. So it's like the price of like a Crunchwrap Supreme or something. And I find that it's a really fun place because we've created kind of a little community there. So there's a lot of people we have a community chat. We have like a meme share thing. We're going to do meetups soon where it'll be like Zoom meetups to like get to know each other. It's, not in any way a replacement for therapy. It is not, mental health advice. It's just kind of people with OCD talking, sharing their experiences, and encouraging each other. And then because I'm a licensed therapist, I am able to kind of like vet the information that's discussed. And like if no one has said anything that's like super out of pocket, but if they did, we could monitor it so it's not spreading misinformation. So
Yes, which is
you
huge.
can join me on there. And then if you are in Michigan and are interested in working with me, you are welcome to send me a message via my website. It's just my name, julietgustafson.com. I am taking clients from my waiting list right now, and I'd be happy to connect with you and talk and get a sense of what's going on and go from there. And
I
then
love that.
intrusive plots. That's the
Intrusive plots.
that's the meat and potatoes of what I do.
Well, if I was in Michigan, I would certainly be on that waiting list, and
Aw, thank you.
I think you're doing a wonderful job, and I really do appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your experience, your story, everything that you're up to, and all destigmatizing OCD for people. So this is huge, and I would love to have you on again. So we'll make
Yeah,
that
I would
happen
love
at some point.
to. I'll
So
respond within 5 years. How about
no
that?
expectations. We're good.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much. This was
Juliet.
really fun.
Yeah, thank you.